was funny, when we talked about this theme of Christmas Carol on the phone, I thought, oh, this is really great, right? You know, it was Josh, Mike, and myself. And then I hung up the phone, and I thought, well, wait a minute. Let's see. Did I really just sign up to be this guy? I don't know if you know. The Grim Reaper, basically. I don't know if you all know the story, but he's the one at the end that is pretty scary. And so I thought, well, let me just roll with that. I pulled a bunch of really scary statistics for you, and I'm going to stand here and menacingly point at them for a while, if that's okay. Actually, who here, and maybe all of you have, I don't know, who here has heard of the Startup Genome Project or report? A lot of you? Okay. Basically, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's an ongoing data collection study that's intended to understand what contributes to startup success or failure, right? It's an interesting read. If anyone hasn't looked into that, I'm happy to share the link. But some of the stats that I pulled, the first one, which many of you are probably familiar with, 9 out of 10, 90% of startups will fail, which is pretty scary. The next, and I thought this is interesting, 74% of high-growth internet startups fail due to premature scaling. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means, premature scaling. Startups that scale prematurely grow 20 times slower than startups that scale consistently. And then finally, those of you who are in development will cringe at this. Inconsistent startups write over 3 times more lines of code in their discovery phase. That's a lot of code and a lot of time. Anybody? I mean, I have a background in coding, so. In this case, premature scaling means, oops, sorry, a little spoiler there. Premature scaling means growing disproportionately across all the 5 major startup growth measures. So product, customers, people, business model, financing. So in essence, what this study is telling us is that not growing well was a death sentence for 74% of the startups that they tracked. I just thought that was interesting. Now, my intention here tonight is not to just bring you doom and gloom, quite the opposite. I'd like to share a couple things that I've learned along the way to hopefully help you grow well. But first, I'll give you a little bit of background about me, about my story. I mean, who am I? What do I know? First, I'm from Philadelphia. I grew up in Mayfair, in the neighborhood. The Jenny from the block kind of thing. Actually, I went to Tyler School of Art for painting, drawing, and sculpture. Yeah, got a little in the house. I got out of school in the mid-90s, and like many fine artists, I worked in area galleries, and I did coat check at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which was what we all did, right? But unlike many fine artists, my father, a chemist, had taught me how to code at a very young age. I've been coding since I was 8 years old. I started with BASIC, and I worked at PHP. So through exploration and interest, I wound up getting heavily involved in the early stages of web and web design. And from that, I moved into fairly robust web applications. I was hooked. And to make a very long story as short as I can, in that weird way, how one thing leads to another that leads to another, I was eventually headhunted by an early stage DSL company in Cupertino, California called Telocity. And I'll show you. This is, I was brought on as the 24th employee, reporting to the founders, who, as luck would have it for me, were pretty much the best of the best. My boss and later mentor, Dr. Thomas Obenhuber, was a physicist who had been a senior executive at Sun Microsystems. A couple of the founders had been on Steve Jobs' leadership team over at Next, which is also, by the way, why our second location was this gorgeous building next to the Apple campus. Apple then reabsorbed it after, but that's where that was. And you can see the little tiny red arrow there. That was my office. I built and managed our web services department, so that whole hall there was my team. You know, I mean, it was an interesting time. We took the company through IPO, and then we later sold it to DirecTV for $180 million. In the 2.5 years that I was there, 2.5 years, the company grew from 24 employees to almost 2,000. So that's growing big, fast, right? Wild ride. After that, I moved on to work with many other startups. I was a product executive for a software as a service company. I consulted through a couple of incubators. And then I also co-founded a nonprofit organization called the Taproot Foundation. Has anyone heard of the Taproot Foundation? So someone. Okay, they're kind of big in New York. That's a now national skills-based volunteerism organization. So suffice to say, a little bit of my background, I've observed the trajectory of many different companies. Some of them successful, some not so much. And so with that little bit of insight, I'd like to share with you 3 basic ideas and some insights on growing well. And the first, don't ask, observe. If you look into the research about what makes a successful startup, you'll hear a lot about finding your product market match. And also that ultimately there's no point in even growing or scaling a product that's not a clear match for a specific market. Yet time and time again, I'll speak with a founder who's rushing forward with an idea without nearly a deep enough understanding of their target customer. They figure if they build a good enough product, the market will reveal itself to them. And honestly, this can be a huge problem. I've seen it again and again. For example, I worked with a software company that moved your data. So it's your apps, your files, your preferences from your old PC to your new PC. They decided early on that they'd fully automate and move everything without any intervention from the users because users don't want to think about that stuff. They just want the system to do it. So they made a disproportionately large investment in overly complex technology based on this premise. The problem was that they came to believe this so-called requirement through limited third-party research and asking friends and colleagues, and some of you may be familiar with that. Unfortunately, the market eventually revealed the truth with its actions. People didn't want all their data moved, they only want some of it, they didn't want to junk up their new PC with all that crap from their old system. Now, when I say understand your market, I don't mean just demographics. I don't mean identifying your market. A lot of entrepreneurs are good at identifying their markets. I mean understanding who they are and what they need. Empathy, behaviors, and one of the best, most surefire ways to understand something is to observe it. Some basic observational studies, we call them contextual inquiries in user-centered design, would have corrected this flawed thinking early on and helped guide this company to a stronger product market fit. So that's the first one. The second, relationships take time. Technology can move very fast. Relationship and people, not as much. Simply networking and meeting people is not enough to build loyalty. It's not enough for people to feel comfortable investing in you and your company. These things take time and multiple interactions. Entrepreneurs are great at calculating how long it'll take to build an infrastructure or to build a product, but many fail to accurately account for the time it takes to form and maintain the investor, advisor, and employee relationships to sustain their businesses. I went through something somewhat similar to this. I left the Bay Area to come back home to Philly for personal family reasons. I had decided, however, to replicate some of the things I had done with the Taproot Foundation, the nonprofit. Within a few months, I had set up our infrastructure, we had hundreds of volunteers, dozens of qualified nonprofits, and we were well on our way delivering our first pro bono projects. However, I miscalculated what it actually meant to move cross-country to where my business network was not nearly as strong. In fact, it was pretty much non-existent at the time. So as a result, despite individual contributions, I was unable to get the larger grants or corporate funding that we needed in the amount of time that we needed it. So put thought into assessing the strengths and weaknesses of your network, plan how you're going to bridge any gaps, and keep in mind the time it takes to build and maintain these relationships. And then finally, third, nothing grows without space and air. I was excited when we came up with this speaker lineup and that I was going to be the ghost of Grow Well. And I asked myself, well, what would I say to me 20 years ago when I was starting out? And it's funny because I recently reconnected with a colleague of mine who is a dear friend that we work together in the Bay Area. And we were talking how for years at a time, we worked 80 to 90-hour weeks. 80 to 90-hour weeks, think about that. And while I don't regret very much, I regret little about what we did or what we accomplished, I don't work anywhere near that anymore. I still love what I do, I still focus, I love being in tech, but I also take time to travel. I block off weekends from work, and I make an effort to diversify my activities. I make sure that I am fully present in each situation. That has not only made me a better person with a far better quality of life, but it's made me a better technologist. I can more easily see the big picture, and I can bring much needed objectivity. Take a breather here and there. Don't just focus on the things that feed your intellect or your wallet, also explore the things that feed your soul. Attack 2015 with gusto, follow your passions, but do so at a pace and a scale that allows you to experience it, enjoy it, and build those lasting relationships. So, with that, if you'd like to learn more about my work as a consultant, you can visit danforthmedia.com/ideas. There's like a ton of content up there. I'm also at Danforth Media, and thank you for listening. Any questions? I don't know if we have time. Oh, okay. Go ahead. Okay.
You said you diversified your time.
Yes.
What other areas did you invest your time in? Was it tech related?
Some. I'm taking this, anybody heard of this John Hopkins MOOC that is the data science? So I'm getting into data science pretty heavily. I also kayak, and I do lots of crafts. And I paint, you know, so, and family, and you know, whatever it is. Oh, there was a question back here.
Can you give an example of a company that you thought scaled too quickly and what they could have done differently?
Well, if I thought through it, I think a lot of them, it's not scaling, let me clarify, it's not scaling too quickly. It's scaling in a way that's not balanced. So it's moving a foot forward in, for example, your product over, and that PC first, the one I gave example, they invested far too heavily in their product before they invested in the acquisition and the research and all that kind of stuff. I would even go so far to say that Telocity, it sounds like a huge success, and in some ways it was, but that grew incredibly quickly, and there was a price to pay for that in terms of the overall quality. So despite the fact that we did sell it to DirecTV, it wasn't at the price point that they had wanted, if that makes sense. Does that answer?
When you moved back to the Bay Area, how did you meaningfully grow your business?
Yeah, that was a tough one. I was like a crazy person. Some of it was social media. Some of it was promoting, and I really lucked out. For some reason, because it was nonprofit work, and that's something to be clear about, I got put on CN8 Newsmakers. I got a lot of promo at PR stuff, which just kind of took off. It was interesting how that just went on its own. I would mention, though, that for-profit and nonprofit has a little bit of a different cadence. People are more easy to kind of jump in and get involved if it's nonprofit work. Okay. Oh, thank you very much.